Hi, everyone. Welcome. We are going to get started in just a moment, give people a chance to roll in this afternoon. Thanks for being here. Nice to see you all. Great. We'll give it another 30 seconds and then we'll jump right in today. All right, let's go ahead and get started. Hi everyone, welcome to our fourth webinar in our Houston webinar series. Today we're talking all about how to turn enthusiasm into action and how to get a Safe Routes to School program up and running in your school. So one thing that's really cool about this webinar series is that there's so many of you who are so excited and enthusiastic about Safe Routes to School. And so we're hoping that today's session will help you kind of channel some of that excitement and energy and passion into creating a school-based program or a small school cohort program. So my name is Corey Johnson. I'm a program support manager here at Safe Routes Partnership, and I'll be your facilitator today. My colleague Natasha Riveron is also on for some backup tech support. So if you have any questions or tech needs, Natasha is here as well. So for those of you who've joined webinars with us before, welcome back. For those of you who are new, it might be new to Safe Routes Partnership, just a little bit about our organization. We are a national organization and we work to advance safe walking and rolling to and from schools and in everyday life, improving the health and well-being of people of all races, income levels, and abilities, and building healthy, thriving communities for everyone. And we're really excited to do some webinar series in the Houston area for you all. Just a quick few housekeeping reminders. So today's session will be recorded. I'll also send out a copy of the recording along with the presentation slides and a survey after the webinar, so keep an eye out for that. You'll get a YouTube link if you want to watch the recording again or share it with colleagues. We also have the chat box open and we invite you to participate. So especially because a lot of our webinars are, about working with communities and engaging each other. It's always nice to have a nice lively discussion in the chat. So please feel free to use the chat, and I'll have some specific questions that I'll ask you to respond in the chat too as well. So speaking of chat, first opportunity to participate. Like I mentioned, I'm Corey with the Safe Routes Partnership. I'm based in Washington, D.C. And I'd love if you all could introduce yourselves in the chat. Just, share your name, your organization or agency, or your connection to Safe Routes to School. And then since we're talking about starting school and community-based Safe Routes to School programs, I'd love to hear from you all if there are any specific schools or neighborhoods in your area, in the Houston area, that you would you'd be interested in working with to develop a Safe Routes to School program. So this could be a school or a community that you're already working with, a school or a community where you think there's a need for Safe Routes to School. But since I'm not in Houston, I'd love to get a sense from you all of what communities or what schools you're interested in working with and areas where you think Safe Routes to School could be beneficial and helpful. So I'm just going to take a quick peek at the chat here. Okay. All right, and please continue to add your thoughts and ideas and introduce yourself in the chat as we continue on. Again, I'd like to hear what you all are working on and what areas you want to focus on. So thanks so much to those of you who have already shared, and I hope that more of you will continue sharing as we move on. I'm just noticing the chat, Larissa says that what they would like to see safe routes in Houston, but does not feel like it's an equitable situation, and that there are some districts that have safe routes and not others. We see that a lot, and hopefully that's something that that we can address as we go through our session today. All right, so to get started, just a quick rundown of our agenda. We're just doing our welcome and introductions now. I'll talk a bit about structuring your Safe Routes to School program, moving into action planning. We'll talk about connecting the schools, generate some ideas for initial activities, and then we'll go a bit into talking about some Safe Routes to School policies and also ways to sustain momentum, followed by a Q&A and then some reminders and next steps. And again, if you all have any questions during the session, feel free to put them in the chat box or in the Q&A box. We'd like this to be a conversation, so please feel free to share thoughts or questions or suggestions throughout the session. Right, so to get started, I wanted to introduce a resource that you all can use in your communities as you start developing your Safe Routes to School programs. This is our building blocks toolkit that we offer to different community members, local organizations, agencies, and this is basically our main step-by-step guide for how to start a Safe Routes to School program. So it has a lot of background information about what Safe Routes to School is, how the program works. It has ideas for different Safe Routes to School activities, ideas for forming Safe Routes to School task forces. It also has some action planning resources and templates, and a lot of things in here are customizable, which is great. I think one of the best parts about Safe Routes to School is that you kind of make it what you want it to be. So I'll share this out in the follow-up email as well, but I did want to let you all know that these resources here and available for you, and it was designed for people like you who are interested in developing these Safe Routes to School programs. So it's definitely worth taking a look at, and a lot of the information that I'm sharing today is from this toolkit. So that's kind of our anchor resource for today, if you will. So I want to start first off by talking about, your Safe Routes to School program structure. And like I mentioned just now, a great thing about Safe Routes to School is that it can be structured in so many different ways, and Safe Routes to School doesn't always look the same in every community. It's really about doing what works best for you and what makes sense within the context in which you're working. So Safe Routes programs can live in different places. And by live, I mean that they can be managed by different entities. So a lot of Safe Routes to School programs are, housed and managed in a local or regional transportation agency. Sometimes it's the planning department that's implementing Safe Routes to School. A lot of times those will be programs that are probably a bit more engineering and infrastructure heavy, just because that's the nature of DOTs and planning departments. Other times, Safe Routes to School programs can be housed in a health department, and those programs might be a bit more focused on education and encouragement programming, not as much focused on infrastructure. Sometimes there's a combination of both. Today, we're actually going to be focusing more on Safe Routes to School programs that are housed either, through a nonprofit organization or a community organization, like a community partner, a school district, or in an individual school. So instead of focusing on programs that are managed by an agency, we're going to be talking a lot about programs that are managed on a smaller level through an organization. It could be a school, PTA, community group, and how you can structure your program that way. And so, while there's no right or wrong way to structure a Safe Routes to School program, I think that each model kind of comes with some pros and cons. So in thinking about these school-based programs, right? So programs that, might be in one school or one school cohort, maybe 3 schools or 5 schools. There are a lot of benefits to running a program that's a bit smaller. So number one, just, being smaller in scale can make it a bit more manageable and less overwhelming for whoever is running the program. You can also personalize it. So, doing a Safe Routes to School program in an individual school, you can make it super, super specific to that school and that school community. So it kind of adds like that personal touch to it. That's a really interesting and exciting element. You also have more control to shape your program. So if you're working with one school or a few schools, there are less hands in the pot. So you only have to deal with, one set of administrators, maybe one organizing team, and you're only working with that one school community. So there's a lot of opportunity for you to determine and the school to determine what this program will look like. So that brings a lot of flexibility and just opportunities to do things you might not be able to do with a larger program. There's also the element of community buy-in. So working in a single school, especially if it's a school or community that you know well, you might be able to get that community buy-in a bit easier, especially if it's a school that you're already connected to. You know people, maybe there's some trust that's already there. So that community buy-in piece might be a bit easier. It's also easier to implement small changes. We know that infrastructure changes can take a long time and be a very involved process. And with a smaller program or a school-based program, you might be able to get a lot more done than you would think, just because it's smaller in scale, and will probably focus more on non-infrastructure programs that don't take as long to implement. And then there's that depth of impact as well. So working closely with one school or small school cohort, your time and capacity will be spread on a much smaller scale. So you'll might be there more, might have more time or resources to dedicate to an individual school, as opposed to spreading things around. So your impact, while it might just be working with one school, could be a bit deeper just because you're working with that school in a more intense and focused way. And of course, there are also some challenges to working on a school-based program, funding being a big one. It's just funding is a challenge, whether you're working on a small program or a large program. So this is not unique to small school-based programs. But, access to, some of the federal and local funding that, DOT might be able to get, for example, that might not be an option for working in on a school-based program. Sometimes they tend to be less structured. A lot of school-based programs are run through PTAs or parent caregiver groups, volunteer groups. People have a lot of different competing priorities, so that structure might be a bit hard to hold on to. Finding a program leader or a champion can also be a challenge. Again, since a lot of these programs tend to be run by volunteers, just finding somebody who has the time and energy to do that, and then somebody who wants to stay on long term can be a challenge. That also goes with the capacity and burnout part. Just it's a lot to ask of people to sign on to lead a program like this. And it's also hard to make infrastructure improvements. So we know that infrastructure is a big part of safe routes to school, and it's a big part of encouraging and making families feel safe to walk and roll to school. And so that infrastructure piece, just because it involves so many different layers and partners, might be a bit hard to do on a school-based level. That's where you kind of need to bring in the local DOT and the engineers and the planners to get some of that work done. So that's something else just to keep in mind. And then just also limited resources and support, from your city or county. There are a lot of agencies and organizations too that, they're at capacity and have a limited number of resources. So that can be a challenge, just trying to make it all, fit and work together. And then lastly, that sustainability piece. Sometimes a school will have a Safe Routes to School program and have a great school champion, and then their child might graduate and that champion goes away and then the program goes away. So sustainability is another thing just to keep in mind when planning a school-based program. So how can we keep this going even after we're not at the school anymore, or our kids aren't at the school anymore? So thinking about starting a school-based program or a school cohort-based program, before you begin anything, it's really important to make sure that that the school is on board. So this will look different depending on the school that you're working with. And but the important part is not just rolling in and saying I have this program, but making sure that the school actually wants them, they're on board and ready to go. So the first thing you need to do is really start thinking about how to get that school buy-in, and that buy-in will probably be important for getting administrator buy-in, and also just buy-in from other parents and community partners and community members. So when I start thinking about, how to get buy-in for safe routes to school on a school level, I have to think about why safe routes to school is actually relevant and important. So what do students and families care about? What does the school care about? What are the community's needs? And then how can safe routes to school address those needs? So for example, right now, there are a lot of schools, especially, during the pandemic and being inside all the time, a lot of people didn't get a lot of physical activity. So that could be something that the school cares about, just creating more opportunities for people to be active with each other. Academic learning loss is another huge one that schools are talking about. So, can you make the case for saying that students who walk and bike to school, are more prepared to, to learn, and can safe routes to school, kind of help with some of the academic preparedness. Social isolation is another one. Again, having been stuck inside for a long time, people didn't have a chance to get out and see each other. Can safe routes to school be an opportunity for people to, come together and connect, just kind of like help rebuild that community that might have been lost. So those are a few ways you can kind of start to think about getting people to buy into safe routes to school on a school level. Another thing that you can think about, again, with like tying to a community need or concern, or tying to an administrator need or concern. Again, this is something that will depend on your school community. So I just listed out a few, even things like needing more student or family activities, or, as was mentioned in the chat earlier, there are some schools that get safe routes to school, and our school doesn't get those same resources. So how can we make, programming infrastructure more equitable? Maybe that's, maybe that's something you can use to kind of make your case for safe routes to school. So if you want to respond in the chat, if there are any, community needs or concerns that you see in a school that you might want to work with, please drop them in. Again, these are just some examples that I came up with. I'm sure there are others, and they really all depend on the school or community that you're working with, because each school and community is different. So the next thing you want to do after you kind of identify, the needs or concerns of the school is really start thinking about how you can build awareness about safe routes to school, and how you can really start to take the lead in shaping this program. So if you're going to approach an administrator or a PTA or another member of school staff or a school board member about starting safe routes to school, here are a few things you can do, again, to kind of like get them on board and build that awareness if they don't already know what safe routes to school is. So first, it's just sharing the benefits of safe routes to school for the school community. So like I mentioned earlier, if mental health is a concern, you can say that safe routes to school gives kids an opportunity to connect with each other and do something that's fun and get physically active, and that can help improve mental health. You can also share a personal story or connection to safe routes to school. So, if there's a safety issue or concern that you witnessed, that you were a part of, bringing that personal story can help build, increase that buy-in. You can also share articles or information about other safe routes to school programs. I know that a lot of administrators like to feel like they're, like to have their school in the spotlight too. So if they hear that like the school in the next district over is doing safe routes to school and got all this great press about it, then they'll want that for their community too. Just sharing all the different amazing things that are going on with safe routes to school can help build in that buy-in. It's also important to show that you will take the lead and that you're just asking for permission and support, knowing that school capacity is so limited, from school staff to administrators to support staff. People just don't have the time for much. So if you can go in and come with your plan and say, look, I want to try out this program. Here's what I'm prepared to do. I just want, just give me the go ahead, and, we can check back in regularly. That can be a big help if a school administrator doesn't feel like they have to do a whole lot. Like they know that you're there and you have it together and you're ready to start implementing things. So come with a plan and be prepared to step up and take the lead. So when you talk about leading safe routes to school, we're probably thinking about leading with a school-based team. So, if you're working with a school or a small school cohort, that team will be responsible for managing safe routes to school on that campus. And leading with school-based team is great. It can help increase capacity. You can share responsibilities. So it doesn't have to be one person leading, but a team can lead. It can also help expand your area of expertise. So every team member can bring something to the table. Maybe there's somebody who's really passionate about bike education, and there's somebody else who's really good at making flyers and communications. You can kind of pair those different skills together to build this really, robust expert team that can lead this program. And it's also good for sustainability. So again, not everything has to fall on one person. It can be a team effort. So if there's somebody who can't do it anymore, if there's somebody who needs to, drop out or has other commitments, the team is still there and can keep the work going. So safe routes to school team responsibilities can look like lots of things. This is the team that will manage the program operations, design events, implement events. The team can develop your program framework, branding, help to liaison between school staff and community members, organize and manage events and activities, and also seek and manage funding. And if this sounds like a lot, which it might, your team also does not have to do all of these things. Your team might just want to do a walk to school day event every year, and that's it. It's totally fine. This can be as formal or as informal or small scale or as large scale as you want it to be. So you don't have to feel like it has to be like an official, committee with all these roles and responsibilities and you do all this work. It can literally just be like a group of community members or parents or caregivers who want to do, a walk and roll to school day once a year. And that's it, if that's how you want to start, or a bike rodeo. It doesn't have to be a huge formal thing unless you want it to be, and that's the structure that you want to have for your program. So again, this is all customizable here. So thinking about who could be on your team, obviously, parents, caregivers, community partners, neighbors. You might find that there are concerned neighbors who want to be a part of this. School staff, again, if they have time, even students, especially middle and high school students who might be traveling to school on their own. Are there ways that they can be involved in a safe route to school team, and what could that look like? Could students plan their own walk to school day event or bike rodeo event? If you have other, ideas of partners or people who can be a part of school-based safe routes to school teams, please go ahead and share them in the chat. I'd love to hear some of your other thoughts or comments. And I see a few comments here in the chat that I'm just going to respond to. Who are normally the campus safe routes to school champions? So safe routes to school champions can be anybody. Sometimes it's a parent or a caregiver, somebody who has a student at the school. Sometimes it's a teacher. Maybe it's the PE teacher. Maybe it's somebody on the school. Maybe it's the school support staff member. Maybe it's somebody from the PTA. It really just depends on the school. So I would say that we kind of get all types of champions. I would say that for school-based programs, it'll probably most likely be a parent or caregiver, or somebody who's connected to a PTA or parent group. And you can also have multiple champions. So it doesn't just have to be like one person. You might have your champion team. So there are some parents, there are some school staff members, there are some community partners, and you are all the safe routes champions, and you function that way as a team. That was a good question.
And then Corey, I just dropped a question from the Q&A in the chat box for you.
Got it. Okay, what do you recommend if there's a desire for children to walk and bike to school, but there's not really a safe route? does it make sense to form a safe routes to school program? And should this energy be directed to trying to work with planners and engineers to put infrastructure in place that can enable safe walking and bicycling to school? If so, how would you recommend starting? Great question. So yeah, obviously, you know, safe infrastructure is a big part of encouraging students to walk and bike to school. And I think that in this case, there are opportunities for you to do both, actually. So there are ways to, you know, engage your, you know, planners and engineers in the infrastructure portion of safe routes to school, and also do some education and encouragement programming. So, you know, I know that Houston, for example, has like their Houston Sidewalks program. So maybe you work with, I think it's through Public Works to, you know, work on sidewalk infrastructure. And then in the meantime, if you want to work on bike education in the school, you can host a bike rodeo or a bike skills course. So there are ways to do both. I would say that there isn't one, you know, right or wrong way. Infrastructure is definitely a big part of safe routes to school, but I wouldn't say that you, you know, can't do safe routes to school without that infrastructure piece. I think that there are ways to incorporate both. And I don't know if there's anybody from Houston or Harris County on today, but if you all have any other, you know, thoughts or suggestions or people to reach out to, then okay. See, Harris County is represented, then please go ahead and drop your information in the chat box as well. But I think that there are definitely ways to do both. Somebody else just said that they've reached out to a few people, city officials, but have not been able to generate any traction or securing funding for safe routes to school. What are some ideas I can try to use to get support and permission to get a project started? And I see that somebody just dropped some funding ideas in the chat box. Let's see, just going through the other ones. Yeah, you know, so funding will always be the big one. I mean, I think that, you know, reaching out, maybe, you know, power in numbers could be helpful. So reaching out as a group or a coalition of, you know, concerned citizens, concerned family members, you know, concerned parents. That could be one way to, you know, kind of approach different, you know, different stakeholders, especially for, you know, for infrastructure funding or for getting a safe routes to school program up and running. You know, if there's any data that you could share. I've seen a lot of, you know, people kind of, you know, advocate for safe routes to school, you know, funding by looking at crash data, even like health data, you know, if there's any information about physical activity rates, obesity rates, anything around mental health, you know, that's also been helpful. Inviting elected officials or agency staff to go on a walk audit, you know, and actually like have people, you know, do a walk audit and be on the ground with planners and engineers. I found that to be helpful. That's something that I've done here in DC. You know, like we actually went and just, you know, walked around a few school campuses and with one of the local, you know, engineers here. And, you know, she was able to see, you know, there are broken sidewalks. There are sidewalks where the sidewalk ends. You know, there are no bike lanes here. And, you know, having that, that on the ground experience was also really helpful. And we did that as a team, as a traffic safety team. So we approached the city and said, we have these concerns. We're a team of people, you know, parents, caregivers, community members, elected officials, and we're coming to you, you know, to ask for your support in improving infrastructure in the area. And that was actually really effective, being able to reach out as a team. Any other questions in the chat? Sources for a walk audit. As far as like resources, I was about to say AARP has a great walk audit resource, and I can drop that in the chat as well, or share in a follow-up email. We also have a walk audit toolkit at the partnership. It's called Let's Go for a Walk, and it tells you all about how to organize a community walk audit. There's a few different walk audit templates that you can use, and that's another great resource you can then take and share with, you know, with an elected official or an engineer or a planner planner and say, look, we did a community walk audit. Here's what we noticed. Can you come out and do a walk audit with us, or validate this information, or can we use this information to, make some improvements here? And Natasha just dropped that resource from AARP in the chat box as well, and our Let's Go for a Walk toolkit. Great questions. Anything else before we move on? All right. So again, in thinking about, kind of like forming that lead, forming that coalition of support, you also want to think about, who will take the lead, who's already connected to the school, what can each person bring to the team, and what incentives can you offer to joining the team? And again, thinking about like what each person can bring, maybe there's somebody in the community who, they are an elected official, or they know somebody in the planning department or public works, or they have some sort of connection that can help to somebody who could help make some of these infrastructure improvements, or who could help with some sort of non-infrastructure programming. These are people who you might want to, kind of bring into your coalition of support, who can really help you build out and develop this program and get support from people who you need, who you need to support you. It's also important when you consider forming a Safe Routes to School team to think about, just your own time and energy, the time and energy of the team members, what the commitment would look like. So short-term versus long-term commitments. Again, areas of knowledge, expertise, or skill. Diverse representation. So does your team reflect the school community and the community that surrounds the school? Making sure that everybody is, is represented is really important, especially if there are equity considerations taken into account. Also just, enthusiasm, who's, passionate about this, who's excited about making changes, who's ready to, advocate for, for better infrastructure, who's ready to, put together a walk to school day program, who can bring that enthusiasm and energy. That's really important. And then also just, who's connected to the school community already. It might be you, it might be somebody else. And then who's able to kind of bring that creativity and have those new ideas, and who can actually follow through. So we say we want to do a lot of things, what can we actually commit to and follow through on? And then just a few additional considerations, looking beyond the group that's involved in everything. I think there are always going to be, those groups of people who, they're on the PTA, they're on the social committee, they're the soccer coach, they are involved in everything. Who are those people who aren't involved in everything, and can we, bring them into the fold? So how can you reach out to new leaders? How can you reduce barriers to participation? So are there, team members who speak different languages? Can you have some flexibility around when you do a walk audit or when you have a meeting? Can there be people who just kind of like volunteer at events every once in a while, but aren't leading things? Or can you offer some sort of incentive for being a part of a Safe Routes to School program? And then also, it's okay to start small. It's really okay to just, again, maybe you start with doing a walk audit around your school, and that's your first goal. That is totally fine. There's nothing that says Safe Routes to School has to look a certain way. It totally depends on what makes sense for your school community. And starting small, you might do 1 or 2 events, 1 year, and then you kind of, as your program develops, you'll be able to do more as that support grows. And again, every school is unique, so make the program your own. Like I just said, this is all customizable. It does not have to look a certain way. These are just a few ideas of things you can do. But this is really a chance for you to make Safe Routes to School, what you want it to be. And then as far as formalizing your team structure, there are some schools that put together a Safe Routes to School task force or a steering committee. Again, for some of you, that might sound a bit too formal. It doesn't have to be a task force. It could be something that's run out of a PTA or PTO. A lot of schools have wellness committees. Could Safe Routes to School be integrated into a committee or a group that already exists? Or you can just, create your own name or create your own structure. You don't have to fall into one of these, into one of these boxes. So do what makes the most sense for you and your school community. Then of course there are, like logistics about how often you'll meet, when and where, people's responsibilities, and what you want to do as a team. So you might have some team members who do want to work on infrastructure. So maybe they're the people who are, trying to connect with planners and, engineers to get those infrastructure improvements done. You might have other people who do want to do more education and encouragement activities. So they might want to focus on walk to school day, bike to school day, bike rodeos. So you can kind of, take a two-pronged approach. And some people working on infrastructure and some people working on, non-infrastructure programming. So that's another way to still do safe routes to school and, kind of satisfy the many different needs that a school community might have. I wouldn't say to like sacrifice non-infrastructure programming, if there are a lot of infrastructure concerns, finding a way to incorporate both would be great. I'm going to pause again and see if there are any questions. Let's see, one more. If you want to demonstrate an unmet demand and an interest in being able to walk and bike to school, what kind of surveys or information gathering might you recommend? So we have a few different like parent survey tools that different Safe Routes to School programs use. And it's just general information that parents and caregivers share about how their student gets to school, what would make them feel more comfortable letting their student walk or bike to school. And Natasha, if you can't find it now, I can also send out our parent survey in the follow-up email. And I know it's in English, it might be in Spanish too, but that's something that a lot of schools use. Even if your school or school district has a survey system, that's another way to gather information. Some people just do like a Google form and send it out. I'll also say that, online surveying is, great, but not everybody can access an online survey. So also just having conversations with people and having, paper surveys you can hand out and, during arrival or dismissal can be helpful. And then just also talking to different, parents, caregivers, and community members. So if you're just, out one afternoon or one morning as kids are getting dropped off or picked up, just talking to people about, their experience or their interest in being able to walk and bike and collect some, some anecdotal evidence can be another way to gather that information. And Paul, we will share a link to the toolkit as well. All right. So we talked a bit about getting your team together. Now we'll talk about action planning. So you have a group ready to go, or you yourself are ready to go. What are some next steps that you can take to start getting some things done? So it's really important when you start action planning to define your purpose and set some goals. So just thinking about, why are you doing this program in the first place? And there can be lots of reasons why. Maybe different team members have different reasons why they want to do safe routes to school. But I think that being able to state your purpose is really important, both to ground your work, but also to help get that community and school buy-in. And then also being able to say, how safe routes to school benefit the school community, which we talked about before. It'll let kids be more physically active, they can connect with each other. It'll make them be more prepared to learn. Whatever the benefit is, it's important to know so you can share it with the school and with other, parents and caregivers and community members. And then you can start thinking about some of your goals. So what is the goal of this program for the next 6 months, maybe for the next year, for the next 2 years? Just to, again, center your work and ground it in something. So for example, a goal might be to increase the number of students who are walking to school. And once you create that goal, you can put some action steps behind it that will help you achieve your goal. So if you want to increase the number of students who are walking to school, you might want to start by talking with parents and caregivers and asking them about, why they're driving their kids to school instead of walking. Somebody mentioned a survey earlier. This could be where you kind of do that, that data collection to see, what people's school travel habits are like. If there are a lot of kids who are being driven to school, why is that happening? Is it an infrastructure issue? Is it a safety issue? Is it a time issue? What's going on there? And then once you have that information, you can take that back and introduce safe routes to school as a potential solution. So, you can say, I get it. You're driving your student to school. Safe routes to school could be a solution, for that. We can do some things where we encourage walking, like having a walk to school day event, or we can do a walk audit, at the school and identify some infrastructure improvements need to be made so that it is safer for kids to walk. And you can also just continue to follow up with parents and caregivers informally, or invite them to your team, and maybe these are people who could be a part of your Safe Routes to School team or committee or whatever you want to call it. And then you can also include an activity, so maybe you host a walk to school day event. And that's something that can both build enthusiasm for walking and can also help, raise awareness about some of the infrastructure challenges that are present in the school. So it can be both something fun and also like an advocacy piece too. So that's just an example of what, some goal setting and action planning can look like on a school level. And like I mentioned earlier, you'll have your key partners who will help you, kind of reach these goals. And these are also people who can be involved in your action planning if you want them to be. So parents, caregivers, school admin, the front office staff, and school support staff. These are people who you might need if you're planning a walk to school day event or a walk audit, who sends out the school newsletter, who can help distribute surveys, who runs the bus loop, who are the crossing guards. These are people who, all kind of help make the school, function and go round. So do they need to be a part of any of these conversations as well? You can also connect with other local community partners. So a lot of Safe Routes to School programs work with local hospitals and health clinics to do things like helmet giveaways, helmet fittings, safety assemblies, walk audits. Sometimes these are places that might have information around surveying and data collection. They might have some of that health data to show that there are schools that need Safe Routes to School because there's high rates of asthma or because there's not people aren't getting enough physical activity. So it's worth connecting to local health partners. Your local bike ped organizations, these are people who might be able to do bike safety assemblies, bike rodeos, bike skills courses. They might have access to bikes that, people can use during bike rodeos. That's another community partner to connect with. Even like nature and environment organizations, any organizations that, get people outdoors and, active, they might be a part of Safe Routes to School. Your food and nutrition organizations, parks and rec, any sports teams, even arts organizations have been a part of Safe Routes to School, designing colorful crosswalks or fun, flyers or posters. So it's really, just dependent on, the school and the people, who are around your area. But I think that with something like Safe Routes to School, partnership is a big piece. This is a hard program to do on your own. So your partners are essential in getting things up and running. And they can also bring in more resources that you might not have. Just checking the chat box. All right, so let's move to talk about program framework a little bit. So like I mentioned earlier, somebody was talking about the engineering piece being really important, and that is important. It is key. Our whole last webinar talked about engineering. So if any of you missed that webinar, I definitely suggest going and taking a look at it. We talk about different infrastructure, an infrastructure framework for Safe Routes to School. And then also we talk about some walk audit information. So in my follow-up email, I'll also send out the recording from our last webinar, which is all about Safe Routes to School infrastructure. Like I mentioned at the top of the presentation, infrastructure kind of involves a lot of different partners, moving pieces, processes, and just might be a bigger task than some of the non-infrastructure programming that can happen on a school-based level. So this next part where we focus more on some of those education and encouragement activities that might be easier to implement than these large-scale infrastructure changes. Again, knowing that all of these are important, all of these play a role in Safe Routes to School, but just for this presentation, we'll talk a bit about non-infrastructure programming. So like I mentioned, engagement and encouragement and education are, kind of our three big non-infrastructure E's that can all be a part of school-based programs. And the benefits of, some of this non-infrastructure programming is that they're a lot lower cost than large infrastructure projects. It can be a nice, easy, quick win, something that people feel really good about. It can be done on a shorter timeline. Infrastructure projects can take a really long time, whereas, a walk to school day event or a bike rodeo can be done a lot faster. They're also customizable. So like with infrastructure, there are a lot of rules and regulations that planners and engineers are dealing with, on a non-infrastructure program, like a walk to school day event or safety assembly. These are things that can be customized to fit your school and your school community. You can also have broad participation. So walk to school day is something that enroll to school day is something that the whole school can enjoy and participate in. And it can really help, build that momentum. And they're also just a lot of fun. Walk and roll to school day is fun. Bike and roll to school day is fun. Doing bike rodeos or bike education assemblies are fun. And I think that thinking about, people's essential needs and concerns, people need to have a little bit of fun, especially when things are, have been so hard. Don't underestimate the importance and power of having a fun, hopefully free event for families to participate in. And just a few examples, again, a lot of you might already be familiar with these things that you can do. Walk and roll to school day, bike and roll to school day is coming up in May. It's either May 6th, I think it's May 6th this year. Walking school bus programs, remote drop-off and pickup programs, any sort of like incentive programs or contests that'll get kids excited about walking and rolling to school, any sort of giveaways, whether it's a bike light or reflective gear or even stickers, like, be surprised how excited a kid might get over a sticker, but a sticker could be, a fun giveaway of walking and biking groups, and then also safety campaigns. In the safety campaign piece, thinking about, trying to get support from elected officials or, or city or county agencies. Your school might want to do a safety campaign, and say, something about needing, bike lanes or, better sidewalks or sidewalks in general. Could you use safe routes to school as an advocacy, as an advocacy avenue to get some of those infrastructure improvements that you want or that you need. And like I mentioned, bike and roll to school day is May 6th. For those of you who aren't familiar with National Center for Safe Routes to School, they are kind of your go-to resource for bike and roll to school day and walk and roll to school day. Bike and roll to school day, it's a new term. It used to just be bike to school day. It is now bike and roll to school day and a walk and roll to school day to be more accessible to people who are traveling with, scooters or using wheelchairs. So it's bike and roll to school day now, which will be May 6th. And the National Center has a bunch of resources for planning bike and roll to school day events. You can register for an event. You don't have to, it's not required. They have a bunch of downloadable materials. They have social media graphics and stickers and banners and all kinds of cool things you can use for your bike and roll to school day event. So their link to their website is here in the presentation. I'll also share it in the follow-up email. And they have the same thing for walk and roll to school day as well. So here's like a fun crossword activity that they put together for walk and roll to school day, and that'll be in October. So, that's one way to kind of, start your program. Just do a walk and roll to school day event. It doesn't have to be on official walk and roll to school day. It can be whatever you want it to be. And again, this website has a lot of resources to help you plan that. You can also just make your own things. Maybe you want to have walk and roll Wednesdays or wellness Wednesdays. If you want to do a crossing guard appreciation day, or even link to an event that's already taking place at the school, if there's, field day or standing assemblies or conferences or something around back to school or an after school program, you can kind of use some of that built-in school programming to add in a safe routes to school element. So, at a school assembly, can you say something about safe walking and biking? Or can you do some sort of walk and roll Wednesday where you encourage people to walk and roll to school? So again, there are ways to make this program your own and make it make sense in the context within which you're working. Any questions about that? All right, and then I quickly want to touch on safe routes to school policies, and I'm just going to go through this really quickly because it could be a whole other webinar, but I think that it's an important part of running a school-based safe routes to school program. So some safe routes to school programs also incorporate policy making into their program, and a policy is basically a written statement that's binding that sets out a general approach to be applied broadly. So if you think about different policies, you know, that your school might have, maybe there's a policy you can't have phones in the classroom, or there's a dress code policy. Those are just examples of different school policies that might be in existence. Policies are good because they institutionalize good ideas, they can reach more people, they can lead to more consistent implementation and create some accountability measures, and they can also help establish responsibilities and relationships. So for safe routes to school, you can create a safe routes to school policy on many levels. We're going to talk a bit about school district and school-based policies today. So a school district can benefit from a safe routes to school policy for a lot of the reasons that you mentioned earlier. Safe routes to school supports academic achievement, can help children learn better, you might improve attendance rates, and safe routes to school help students arrive to school safely and travel home safely. So having some sort of safe routes to school policy on a district level is a great way to support students and families. So a lot of times when thinking about creating a safe routes to school policy, it will involve collaborating with school board members, which can be an interesting experience depending on what the school board situation is like in your neck of the woods. To get support from the school board, it really helps to do some basic research and get some inside scoop on the board members. So who are they? What do they care about? And then kind of start to build those relationships, and also figuring out what the board members want. Do they want to be a part of your task force? Do they want to come on a walk audit or attend a walk enroll to school day event? Invite them into the fold if that's something that makes sense. You can also go to a school board meeting and present your ideas there. If you have ideas for safe routes to school, implementing safe routes to school, looping in the superintendent if that's possible, and then also offering, any sort of recognition or people with a good photo op. So invite them out to walk to school day, take some pictures, put it in the school newsletter or local, paper or website, and that could help, kind of get them on board. But this is all about networking and relationship building. If that's not your thing, somebody else on your team might be able to do that. If that is your thing, then maybe this is how you contribute to a safe routes to school team, and everybody else works on, infrastructure or programming or other things, and you're kind of like the networker on the team. And then as far as your safe routes to school policy and different topics to focus on, there are a few different topic areas: support, guidance, logistics, and planning and design. I'd say that for community members, probably the support piece and the guidance piece will probably be where you're focusing most of your efforts. So you might just want to get a policy that just offers general support for safe routes to school. So your school district says, we support safe routes to school programs. Doesn't necessarily say anything about, funding them or going into too much detail, but just that safe routes to school programs are, a part of our district. You can also have support statements that limit school restrictions. So there are some schools that say, students aren't allowed to walk or bike to school. There are some schools that say that. So you might want to have a policy that says that you can't do that and that students should be allowed to walk and bike to school. You might want to have something in a parent-student handbook with information about safe routes to school, safe walking routes, safe biking and rolling routes. That can also be a part of a safe routes to school policy. You can also have a policy that kind of offers some guidance around how to organize a walk audit or a walking school bus or a bike train, or how to do a walk to school day event, or again, recommended routes or traffic education. And again, you just want to put that down in a more formal way, in a school or district handbook. And then the logistics are really, logistical policies are around, creating safe routes to school, district task forces and wellness committees, which is probably not where you all be focusing most of your time right now. And the other one is about planning and design, which is more for the, for the planners and engineers who'd be doing school school infrastructure improvements. And another idea you can start thinking about is, incorporating safe routes to school into some sort of district wellness policy. So school districts are required by federal law for students to participate in, nutrition programs. A lot of these programs are historically weak on physical activities. So can you find ways to incorporate physical activity into your district wellness policies by using safe routes to school? And this can be done both on a school board level or a school district level. Somebody has a question. When do most school districts set their policies in spring for the next year? You know what? That's a good question. I don't know. I actually don't know if it's like a standard across the board. I don't know if it depends on like the electoral schedule or fiscal year. I don't know. I can find out though. It could also be worth just going on your district website and seeing like what their policy agenda is or when their next meeting is and asking a school board member. I don't think that there's like one standard answer, but I can do some investigating around that. I'm guessing that each district will kind of have their, their own timeline around creating policy. And then there are also just a lot of informal policies you can think about. So can you have information again in your student and family handbook on a school website? Can you list the safe routes to walk, or can you have something about encouraging walking and biking to school? Can you incorporate some safe walking and biking elements into health and PE? And there are also opportunities to include students and parents in that policy-making process as well. So, students and parents and families and caregivers know what they need, so how can they be a part of shaping some of that policy? Safe Routes also has a policy workbook that we put together a few years ago. It's just a free online tool that goes in way in depth about safe routes to school policies, both at the beginning level, at intermediate level, and at advanced level. It's a Word doc, so I can attach that to my follow-up email as well. It's a great resource and allows you to kind of create your own policies based on, on your local needs. So it's a resource for you all and a national tool. So for those of you who are kind of thinking about some policy-focused work, definitely check out the policy workbook. And we have a few other tools as well that talk about focusing on safe routes to school policy. So some tips around working with school districts, tips on working with school board members and superintendents. Even just like a checklist about how to, approach a school district or a superintendent. So I'll send out those as well, but those can also be really helpful resources, moving forward. And then just as far as sustaining safe routes to school, funding is always the big issue. So, how can we pay for a walk to school day or a bike rodeo? Obviously there are, school fundraisers, local community organization funds and foundations, people just donating, whether that's resources, time, business sponsorships, and also just pooling resources with other community partners. So again, Safe Routes to School is really one of those all hands on deck things, especially because resources tend to be very, very limited. So having everybody kind of pitch in something can be a way to help sustain safe routes to school. Like I said, connect with their local programs and partners. They might be doing safe routes to school things already, or might have some sort of resource that could be helpful for you, even if it's just like, the contact information for somebody who might be able to help with something. So keep your partners close to you. And then lastly, just a few, local safe routes to school happenings. I know there's Safe Routes to School Baytown, which is doing some great work, some walk to school day events, some work with Safe Routes to Parks, which is another program that we work on, which is really great and exciting. And then there's the pilot program that's happening in Acres Homes. That's a part of the Be Well Acres Homes initiative run by MD Anderson. So again, those are programs. There are people who are already working in the Safe Routes to School world who you might want to, connect with or learn from. So definitely check out some of those programs as well. And somebody else just asked if we have a resource guide that details a bike rodeo cost and considerations. I don't know if we have a bike rodeo toolkit. We might. As far as cost, I'll say, again, this is one of those things that could be as high cost or as low cost as you want or need it to be. The bike rodeos that I participated in have been run by groups of different community partners. So, you know, I came and did something on the Safe Route side. We had our local Safe Kids Coalition who came and did a helmet giveaway. And then we have a local bike advocacy organization who actually had a fleet of bikes and provided some instructors who could lead the bike skills courses. And so that we were able to put on at a school at no cost to the school. It was just a school that we had worked with and they wanted it. And so we came out and did a bike rodeo on a bike and walk to school day. I'll check and see if we have any other resources around cost or considerations. But again, it's one of those where it can be large scale or small scale as you want to need it to be. Any other questions before we wrap up? All right, well, thank you all so much for sharing your thoughts, your ideas, for asking such great questions. Like I mentioned at the top of this, I love the enthusiasm from this group. And I think that, yeah, it's great that you all are so passionate about safe routes to school and getting things going, you know, in your communities. So I will follow up with a bunch of the resources that I mentioned in the presentation. If you have any other questions for me, please feel free to reach out. I'm always happy to chat more, send more resources, or hop on a call. And again, keep an eye out for a follow-up email and a survey and a recording of this presentation, which should be available probably on Monday for you all. Thank you all so much. I hope you'll join us for our final Houston Safe Routes to School webinar, which will be either later next month or in early May. So thank you all so much and enjoy the rest of your afternoon. Have a good one.